Oh, thank you. So, a very good evening to everyone. We are at the last stage, the last session of the day. So I'm very excited. So first of all, a round of applause for everyone that has been here from 8 a.m. That's what I heard, from 8 a.m. So welcome to this very important session on public, private and community partnerships for biodiversity protection and climate resilience. So it's quite a mouthful. I didn't pick this topic, right? But fortunately for us today, we have these two very deeply respected leaders, the movers and shakers within the field, to demystify what does it mean to have a public and private partnerships for community. And we'll be exploring how strategic partnerships between governments, the private sector, and communities, and how it can not only protect biodiversity, but also drive climate resilience, especially when we talk about equity, local and indigenous knowledge, and long-term impacts. And these outcomes are to be at the center of things. And we also know that true stewardship can only happen when we have the local actors empowered. So that would mean they would have the space, they would have the trust, they would also have the resources to shape solutions on the ground that is locally led. And of course, this solution has to be grounded in their own priorities, and it has to be built to last. And we're talking about sustainable solutions here. And that means that we need to rethink the way how we partner up and how we work together and how finances really flow. And not to just meet the donor requirements and reporting needs and compliance, but to really strengthen the capacity, the autonomy, and confidence of those who live the closest to the water and to the land. So this will be a really conversation style, a dialogue. There will not be any Q&A session, that's what I heard. But I promise you'll walk out from this room with rich insights from these two very, like I said, respected leaders in this field. So we started off with a round of applause, and now joining us today is Jemilah Mahmood. So everyone knows her for her leadership. Knows her not only from the LinkedIn photos, but her leadership in planetary health and really investing in young leadership for the applaud. And humanitarian diplomacy and her ability to connect to global and local perspectives. And next to her, we are joined by Tan Sri Abdul Wahid Omar. Thank you so much. The trustee of WWF Malaysia and also the previous chairman of Bursa Malaysia and a vocal advocate for sustainable finance and governance. So the session will be really short here. I was told it has to be short because it's the last one and everyone is so hungry. And so we have 2 rounds of questions. And the first question is, the first segment is really around climate resilience and inclusive partnerships. So I turn to Tan Sri Jemilah first. So we know that communities on the front lines of biodiversity loss and climate disasters, they are not just there to be equipped to have a role in conservation, but they are there to also thrive and live and have the same rights as us. So they have to thrive in a rapidly changing environment. So in your line of work, how do you see, can we better integrate this risk around climate risk, adaptation, and resilience into future upskilling, reskilling? We're talking about human capital and education framework for the whole nation, but also particularly for these vulnerable communities.
Thank you very much, Nadiah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good afternoon, everyone. Such a pleasure to be here. Thank you for putting me next to Tan Sri Wahid. I'm a bit nervous because he's someone I really respect. For those who don't know, and I will embarrass him now, Tan Sri was my first corporate donor when I started Mercy Malaysia. And I remember shamelessly going to his office, not knowing, he's never met me, I never met him, and I said, I heard you're a really good person, and I really need to tell you about what I'm doing, and I think, Tan Sri, you really paved the way for me in Mercy Malaysia, so thank you very much, God bless you. So, when we talk about resilience, you know, I always look back at the people who taught me the most, and that is people in the front lines, people in communities. And I recall many stories, but let me give you one story that I've witnessed in so many countries, but I want to exemplify an example in Kalimantan, where there's a lot of deforestation in a place near the Gunung of the East Kalimantan. And when they ask the community, why are you doing this? You know, you're damaging the forest and so forth. And they said, because we need to earn some money to provide health for our children, because, you know, these are important for us, you know, health, education. So this wonderful organization, I'm going to talk about another organization, you know, we have to highlight good organizations, called ASRI. And what they did was they said to the men and the women, put your machetes down. We will take care of your health. We'll build a health center for you. We will make sure that you will get the health care that you need for your families. In return, we will give you plants, seedlings, and so forth, and tools, and you replant the forest. And when you come to the clinic, you pay us back with seedlings, with anything you pick from the forest, with craft that you build from the forest material, or even manure. And this has completely transformed the forests in this area, and this is one of many examples where communities have actually taught us so much about why they have no choice, because there is a livelihood and economic element to how they can then thrive and provide health and education for their children. So I think, you know, this is a really nice example of how you can actually work with frontline actors, learn from them, support them, but most of all, allow them to have dignity to carry on with their work. And this has been something I've been doing in the last 20 over years of my humanitarian career, is really learning and listening and then adapting the programs. So climate literacy, understanding climate, is actually very fundamental, I think, as should be as fundamental as reading and counting. But for many people in the front lines, indigenous people, it is knowledge they have. So I have 3 words that I banned from my organization when I worked in the UN and Red Cross, is that you cannot use the word capacity building, because everyone has capacity, some have more than you, so call it capacity sharing, because we need to learn. You cannot use the word beneficiaries, because you benefit more sometimes from the people who have less. And the third thing is, you never call anything a natural disaster, because it's never natural. It's always a vulnerability that we have created. So I think that, you know, if you want to talk about education and literacy and understanding, you know, risk and resilience, it doesn't begin only in the classroom. I think one of the biggest problems we have is we are so disconnected from nature. And there are many places in the world now where there are forest schools. People are actually being, even in Geneva, my staff sends her son to a forest school, and you know, she drops him off, the teachers take a bus and they go into the forest, and the class literally is in the forest, come rain, shine, winter, whatever. And the second thing, of course, you know, we can do that, you know, bringing theory to practice by actually getting children to look at the areas around them. How do they do heat mapping around their school compound or their housing estate? I think we need to be more creative in how, you know, we look at education per se. What we have done, certainly at our, you know, I work at Sunway University now with the Center for Planetary Health, and we've done a couple of things. One, we have created something called a Planetary Health Playbook, that was actually supported by Bank Islam and Lekopak that does Upin Ipin, because everybody knows Upin Ipin, right? So it's a playbook, you create a cat, it's called Upin Ipin Goes to Town. I didn't realize that it's Upin Ipin, the cat is called Ipin. So Ipin goes to the city, and it talks about, you create an origami cat and you walk with the cat into the book. And the storytelling is that it goes to the city, sees a lot of waste, sees a lot of plastics, sees a lot of pollution, food waste and so forth. And along the way, they do also little activities. Now, when you get children to do things like that, the parents also learn, because they have to do the stuff with the children. So we piloted it with several schools, and we got Nicole David to also test it on the children. And you cannot imagine the appreciation of that knowledge by both parents and the children. Their understanding of the importance of protection of the environment just grew. We finally got Ministry of Education to look at it and said, oh, this is good. So, slowly I think we'll influence the Ministry of Education to take some of these playbooks and use them. And then at the higher level, what we're doing, as you mentioned, with young people, is that young people have a lot of energy and they're activists. Right? They are upset, there are very high incidence of anxiety and depression among young people as a result of climate change, and it's not been addressed. So what we've done is, we do something called climate courage workshops, which get people young people to face climate change. How do they build the courage to face it, and reduce the anxiety? But we also teach activists and young people diplomacy. You can't just do everything, with a hammer. You've got to learn the art of diplomacy. So when you get young people in these areas, what we do is then advocate to the government to say to NRES and others, say, when you send a delegation, please make sure there's a young person in your delegation. How dare we as adults talk about young people's future without young people being at the table? Because it's their future. And finally, at the university level, what we've done is actually at Sunway, and those who know me will know how persistent I am. In the first year that I came in, I said, we need to build a mandatory course for planetary health. So we built it, and then we made it mandatory from this year. And I'm very, very happy to share that the National Educational Blueprint for Tertiary Education in Malaysia 2026 onwards will have planetary health and sustainability as a pillar. So in October, we will be convening 300 people from all the universities in Malaysia, both private and public, and work with them. We need to get the buy-in from the university leaders so that we will build that curriculum, so Malaysia may well be the first university in the world to teach sustainability and planetary health to all its students.
So I'd like to follow up on that. You brought a really important theme here that you can't thrive on an empty stomach, right? And the word that you use here is capacity sharing. I think these are really the key principles, I would say, to ensure that strategic partnerships are grounded in shared values and mutual respect. Specific on working with local communities and indigenous groups, do you have any other applying, like what you said, applying the theory into practice of key principles and practices to work with local communities and indigenous people?
I think the first thing is don't assume you know everything. Mm-hmm. I learned the hard way when I was advisor to the Prime Minister during the pandemic. I was tasked to go in to meet the Orang Asli to talk about vaccinations, right? And I went in, some of them were very kind. Of course, nobody in the Orang Asli community knows who I am, right? But when I went in, and some of them actually looked at me and said, when we were struggling, where were you guys? Right? So you have to go in very humble, be ready to be shouted at, and then getting to know the social structures within indigenous communities, because there are very well established social structures. The Tok Batin, for example, is the most important person, people tell me you must go with cigarettes, and I say, I can't go with cigarettes, I'm a doctor, right? But somebody else can bring the cigarettes, but I need to talk to the man. But, you need to understand those social structures, be humble, be very humble, be patient. It took us about 3 visits before they finally agreed. And sometimes you need to rethink your strategy, because yes, I want to vaccinate you, but you are not happy with this. So what do I do then? I say, okay, instead of vaccinating you, can you create a barrier in front of your Orang Asli village so that anyone who wants to come in must show you their vaccination certificate. So at least you can see how you might be able to protect them if they're not willing to be vaccinated. So that creativity has to happen, right?
That's really interesting. To follow up from Tan Sri Jemilah, the points that you've made is basically building trust, right? So you're building trust with these communities, and really that is something valuable, because that's the only way where partnerships can work best, when they are built on trust and they enable local actors not to just be a short-term implementer. That's what I've always heard, for donor-driven outcomes and commitments, but long-term stewards. So turning to Tan Sri Abdul Wahid, so as a former chair of Bursa Malaysia and long-time advocate of sustainability, what role do you see capital markets and institutional investors in designing an inclusive conservation models that empowers community, that's not disempower, must empower communities and integrate matters that, for example, Tan Sri James has mentioned about traditional ecological knowledge, and maybe you can share what are the best practices that's been done on the ground, that we have seen on the ground, especially around in Belum Temenggor or in Sempurna, Sabah.
Well, thank you, Nadiah. There's a lot to cover. Let me begin by thanking Yas and Hasanah for inviting me to be here this evening. Truly a pleasure to be here. To your point, I actually retired from Bursa Malaysia 3 months ago. Today, I'm wearing the hat as the chair of WWF in Malaysia, as well as MySDG Foundation. So running away a bit from the corporate sector. But since you asked about the corporate sector, I think we're fortunate in the sense that the Malaysian corporates have truly embraced sustainability at its core, in my view. And they all realize that embracing sustainability is no longer an option, but is critical for business survival and longevity. And this is actually where they always comply when it comes to reporting. They're all compelled to report on the sustainability framework. They do it dutifully, truly embracing the 3 elements of environmental, social, and governance. Many of them learned the hard way during the pandemic on the social aspects, when some Malaysian companies were slapped with a withhold release order by the US Customs and Border Protection Agency. But I think most of them have recognized the issue and have corrected them in that respect. Now, companies that embrace sustainability typically will provide better returns. That's actually true. If you look at the FTSE for Good Bursa Malaysia Index that we developed since December 2014. Today we have more than 120 component stocks in that. But unfortunately, for this year, the returns are actually lower than the KLCI. So for example, year to date, KLCI is down 4.5%. But the FTSE for Good Bursa Malaysia Index is down 6.3%. My view is actually that's unique to the current year, but as things normalize, I think inshallah, companies that do good will definitely perform better and more sustainably for longer term. Now, beyond compliance with the reporting framework and doing good, many of these corporates, they do support direct conservation efforts. So for example, Maybank in the Belum Temenggor forest complex that you mentioned when it comes to tiger conservation. We also have people like CIMB who support us at WWF when it comes to the conservation of the situ wetlands. In all this, it involves the government, the state government, local authorities, as well as the community. So if I can take the example of the Belum Temenggor Forest Complex. Now, we're talking about tiger conservation. You all had the pleasure of listening to Lara earlier about what Lara and the team at Rimau are doing in Perak State. So we have a similar landscape in the Belum Temenggor Forest Complex, and that includes the Aman Jaya as well. we started working with Perkhidmatan and the Perak State Parks Corporation. Datuk Shahriza, the former CEO, is here. And among others, with local community, we work with typically the Jahai and the Temia community. That the Jahai, you heard from Shakri, I think, early on. I think probably only 3,000 people, whereas the Temia tribe is actually much bigger because they're also in existence in, apart from Perak, Kelantan, also in Pahang as well, about 35,000 or so, 10 times bigger. But the idea is actually to actually work with them. When we started with the patrolling, we only had 3 teams of 5 members each, about 15, that means altogether. But today, we have 28 teams of 5, meaning that we have some 140 rangers. So how we work with the community, in 4 areas. I think, first of all, in capacity sharing, using Tan Sri Jemilah's term, where we provide them with professional ranger training, equipping them with skills in patrolling, navigation, data collection, and the use of GPS, and how to install the camera traps and so on. In terms of sustainable livelihoods, obviously, employing them as community rangers under the Project Stampede that will offer them a stable income, while the related initiatives encourage them in terms of sustainable forest-based products and ecotourism opportunities as well. When it comes to environmental education, we engage them when it comes to conservation awareness, and from understanding the role of the tigers in maintaining the forest health, to recognizing the long-term value of the intact ecosystems, not just for the fauna and flora, but in terms of the water. So as you know, we do need the ecosystem services for water as well. And of course, we talk about shared ownership as well. So when you involve the community in this effort, you will see the sustained outcome. So basically, we have seen 0 snares over the past 3 years, and we don't see any evidence of poaching within the places that we cover. But at the same time, from the camera traps, we're also seeing some young cubs being photographed, and that's actually giving us encouragement that whatever work that we're doing is actually bearing efforts. So obviously, the real data will be shared by Perkhidmatan, so we're not at liberty to share the numbers and so on. But look at the numbers that we have from Rimau as well. I think clearly we are seeing encouraging signs of improvement when it comes to tiger conservation. What we need to do better, Lara mentioned this to me this morning, is about the need for all of us to collaborate better. So not just between the public sector, the government, the state government, the corporates and the NGOs like ourselves, but between ourselves. So WF and Rimau and others that operate in this space to collaborate better. And I think this is where you will see a more pronounced outcome and more sustainable outcome. Thank you.
Brilliant. So incredible work, what's been happening on the ground in terms of biodiversity protection and how public and private partnership can improve what's happening on the ground with communities. And I think the takeaway that I can get from both of your answers is that building partnerships isn't just about combining resources. I think for laymen, it was just, okay, we get money from public, we also get money from the private partnership, and that's it, So I think that's the common understanding, but it's not enough, right? Obviously, from what I understand from your responses is that you really also need to invest in the human capital and the social capital of these communities because, again, you can't thrive, you can't adapt, you can't change if you're constantly hungry, you don't have clean water, you don't have infrastructure, etc. And thank you both for sharing those insights. And it's really important what Tan Sri Abdul Wahid mentioned about they have to be included, these committees have to be included in the design process. If they all came in late during the design process when these local actors are, or when funding flows are driven mainly by compliance to donors' requirements, we might risk weakening this community's ability to lead and adapt. So this is where the next part of the conversation, which is the final part, around how we can design this. What are the structures that we need to rebuild, perhaps, right? On centering community leadership, on really lessening the vulnerability instead of exacerbating it. The next question to Tan Sri Jemilah, how do we do this? How do we prioritize long-term ecological and social outcomes, especially when many funding models that we see today and donor expectations are still tied to short-term results and very measurable outputs? I think, how do we actually avoid the pitfalls of those poor practices that leads towards maladaptation? Yeah.
So the theme of the forum is philanthropy that listens. And I think we're very lucky to have Yas and Hasanah in Malaysia, because they do listen. We really enjoyed working with them on EPO and so forth. These are not short-term things. You need to mindset change, changing the way people look at economic development, finding alternatives, look at community-based, resilience and so forth. But let's be frank, right? If you take the instance of peatlands, for example, it's the most precious commodity for carbon, right? Peatlands don't heal on a grand cycle, right? I mean, if our money breathes short-term, our forests will also breathe short-term. That's a simple answer. And I think what we need to do is finance on the time scale of ecosystems. That means a completely radical shift in what you do, how much you invest, and having that long-term view. And I think that's where, the previous panel talking about Islamic finance, Islamic social finance. I had the pleasure of working with Prof. Azmi, bringing Islamic finance to the UN. At the time, they said, the Talibanization of the UN, Jemilah was responsible. That was the nickname I had, right? But I said, here we have an instrument that works, and why is it that it's not applied globally? So we've got to have those kind of thinking, not just philanthropy. Philanthropy is important to absorb early risk. I think that we need concessional capital, we need that to be taken to scale, we need outcome payments that reward verified gains. So all this impact investment that we're talking about here. And I think you need to link disbursements with real recovery. You need to, for example, in the case of the peatlands, re-wetted peat and stabilized water tables, restored habitat, returning of species, and so forth. And the real test is whether fire days are fewer, mangroves survive 2 monsoons, for example, fish stocks recover, children stay in school, women sit on governance council. This is really important. I cannot leave without saying the importance of inclusion of women, because again, another word I hate is empowerment, but if you give women the space to exert their power, then you will see the whole community change. And that's the reality. I've seen that across every crisis I've worked in. So I think bottom line, we need to look at how philanthropies start shifting gears as well. There may be some philanthropies that only do short term. Let them do the short term. But I think the stable ones need to look at long term, bring in the blended financial mechanisms, and then, build that together. I want to just maybe touch on this issue around partnership. As you know, I've worked in the humanitarian sector for many years. Anita used to work with me. And I think one of the important things, you talk about participation of communities in the design. It's not easy. Let's be frank, right? But unless you take the time to do that, and you also teach them how to participate. Because if you just say, okay, participate, tell me, okay, you want to build housing, for example. right? And then you tell them, oh, we're going to build you new housing that is whatever, eco-friendly, whatever. They may not know, but they don't know everything. So I think taking that time is extremely important. And many times, people rush because they're on very tight timelines for their program cycles and their grant cycles.
That's really important. Sometimes when we run projects, we almost always forget the learning element. It's always monitoring, evaluation, but no learning. So emphasizing on the word learning. To Tan Sri Abdul Wahid. So around the same themes here, but given to the increasing trend and upward trend that we see on public-private partnerships in biodiversity conservation, so how can we also ensure that this collaboration are genuinely equitable and community-led? If I may add one more word here, mutual and downward accountability, right? Especially when there are differences in power. And we also see differences in how we perceive technical, these are quite technical things, carbon, we're talking about carbon, we're talking about CO2, but this might not something where communities also perceive the same way. And of course, the third part is the long-term financial expectation from both partners. How do you see this? How do we bypass and build a better mutual respect? Yeah.
Well, thank you, Nadiah. Well, it is important that in everything that we do, we understand the purpose of what we're doing, and the level of comprehension on the issues must be high. So we're talking about biodiversity, we need to actually explain to all the constituents what do we mean. If we talk about carbon sequestration, we need to explain, okay, what's the emission, throw some numbers, calculate, so that they can understand, and when they understand, they comprehend the issue, that's when they become committed when they do it, and that becomes more accessible. But if I may just take a step back and broaden that conversation and go back to the issue of partnership. Anita will kill me if I don't mention about MySDG Foundation. Now, we all know that the responsibility for fulfilling the Sustainable Development Goals 2030 rests with the whole society. But the primary responsibility, I would say, is actually with the government, right? So government will allocate all the budgets, and it's actually mainstream. But, and that's actually covered in the 13th Mission Plan and in the annual budgets that we have. But there'll be times when some government programs will not reach some of the marginalized communities. And this is where the government, 3 years ago, set up MySDG Foundation, in order to make sure that we will identify and address the unserved and underserved communities in the concept of leaving no one behind. So Alhamdulillah, the idea will be to seed some funding and collaborate with United Nations agencies and later the corporate sector to help address these unserved and underserved communities. So government started with a 20 million ringgit seed funding. We had our first round of call for proposal in 2023, and then another one was done last year and early this year. So we have identified some 31 projects worth about $7.5 million. That's about 32 million ringgit that's actually under program being implemented today. And some of those will include dealing with, again, some of the stateless people, refugees, urban poor, as well as the Orang Asli community. So there's one program, for example, we talk about enabling or empowering the community to raise poultry, free-range chicken and so on, so that they can earn decent income, whilst at the same time making sure that impact on the environment is actually managed as well. So I think this is where we have the involvement of the government, the private sector, and in this case, very unique, is the UN agencies. So the idea would be, once we have gotten the 2 rounds, in the 3rd round, we would like to involve some international funding from UN agencies as well as corporate Malaysia to actually help this. So at the end of the day, the idea would be to help support Malaysia in achieving the UN SDG. So not sure whether you're aware, but a few weeks ago, Malaysia submitted our voluntary national review on our SDG 2030. In that submission, based on current progress, Malaysia is expected to achieve 43% of what we committed by 2030 of all these goals, right? Now, this is certainly higher than the 16% which the Honorable Helen Clark mentioned this morning, because globally, I think whole world is actually falling short at only 16, 17%, but Malaysia is actually higher at 43%, but even then, we should strive to see how we can actually improve it, and hopefully, with the involvement of all society, including the civil societies, the improvement can be a lot better in the future. Thank you.
Right. Thank you both. That's really rich. I hope there is some documentation is being done to gather all this information. So I've seen that red thing, time is up. Thank you for the notification. I think the really important takeaway that I can understand from all this, changes takes time. And of course, a changing mindset needs a lot of resources, right? And how we do that really matters, right? Just handling a community, capital and money does not mean you've solved the issue or problem. So I'd like to ask both of you to maybe summarize very briefly, maybe in 20 seconds each, about something radical that you believe funders and government or private sectors must do radically to differently moving forward.
Well, first thing I will say is we need to move at the speed of science and not the pace of politics. This is not going to be popular, but I think what we need to do is radically depart from fossil fuels, because while you might be able to build the climate resilience and do all sorts of interventions, if you don't turn the tap off, then we're going to be in trouble. So I think bottom line is that protecting the biodiversity conservation is not about saving nature from people, it's about saving people with nature.
Well, thank you, Nadiah. I just want to say thank you to Tan Sri Jemilah and Hasanah for training Anita and many others to provide the talent that we need in the civil society. But I don't think I have anything radical per se, but I think suffice to say that when you really empower communities and when the partnerships are strong and when the goals are shared, I think, God willing, what we're talking about from roots to resilience is not just a possibility, but it is inevitable, inshallah. So thank you. I look forward to working with all of you in both WWF as well as MySDG Foundation. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you all, folks. A round of applause to our panelists. Thank you.